Today, Jeremiah the prophet. Now Jeremiah was the son of a priest, and one day God spoke to Jeremiah. God basically said, I choose you, Jeremiah. God said, I chose you even before you were born. Even before you were in your mummy's tummy, I chose you to share my words with Judah and with all the nations around. And you know what happens next? God reached out his hand and he touched Jeremiah's mouth. And he said, Jeremiah, I've put my words in your mouth. See, Jeremiah wasn't speaking for himself, he was speaking for God. He spoke God's words. And Jeremiah's job, like all the prophets, is to remind the people of God's law. To warn them. If they keep worshipping other gods and not looking after the poor and the needy, well then this nation from the north, Babylon, are going to come down and attack them. But Jeremiah also gives hope. He says one day this big bad bully, Babylon, well, they're going to get destroyed. And all the nations are going to come and worship God. So I just want to spend a bit of time thinking about what Jeremiah tells us about the law of God, the words of God. Now remember the 10 commandments. They're written in stone. I've not got any stone here, but I've got some pictures here. Remember the 10 commandments? We looked at the 10 commandments in Exodus and again in Deuteronomy. God number 1, no other gods. Don't misuse God's name. Rest on the Sabbath. Respect your parents. Don't murder. Mummies and daddies stay together. Don't steal. Don't lie. Don't get jealous. The people had been told God's law, what he said was good. They'd got it written down. But they said nah. They didn't listen. God says that when we follow him and do what he says, it's like drinking cool, clean water. It refreshes you. It gives you energy. It's good for you. But he says you've rejected that cool water. Instead, you've gone for something much worse. You're following another law. And it's a bit like drinking vinegar. Ooh, it's bad for you. You know what? I drank vinegar once. I thought it was apple juice. And it was horrible. I wanted to be sick. What a silly thing to drink. Well, God says, Jeremiah says, when you reject my law and follow some other gods and other laws, it's like rejecting water and drinking vinegar. It's not good. So they've rejected God's law. So God sends Jeremiah to them. Can you see him there? And Jeremiah basically just reminds them about God's law. He speaks God's law to them. But you know what? They reject Jeremiah too. They're like this. No, 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 no. They don't want to listen to him. They say, I won't believe you, Jeremiah. And instead they listen to false prophets. Because these false prophets just tell them what they want to hear. Remember, but Jeremiah speaks for God. The people insult Jeremiah. They have a go at him. And you know what they do to him? They put him in a well. It's a dry well. Well, it's got a bit of mud at the bottom. And they leave him in this well to sink into the mud. Thankfully, someone comes and rescues him. And then near the end of Jeremiah, guess what they do next? They kidnap him. And they take him with them to Egypt Even though Jeremiah says, don't go there. Oh dear. See, the people have rejected the commandments of God. They've rejected the words of God. They've rejected the prophet of God who speaks God's words. That's why God says this big bad country of Babylon are going to come and destroy your temple and destroy your city and take you away. Now, if you've been watching these videos, you'll know that God's people, they just keep making that same mistake, don't they? They won't keep God's laws. They keep ignoring it again and again and again. You might say that there's something about all of us, me, you, everyone, that doesn't want to follow God's way. That we've got bad hearts. But here's the good news. Jeremiah says that one day God will bring his people back to safety from all over the world to live with him in a perfect place. And what's more, he'll make his people perfect. He will put his law in their hearts. He'll write it on their minds. One day, God's people will always want to do what God says. They'll know how to do it, and they'll do it. And God says, I will be their God, and they will be my people. You see, if I was in heaven now, I'd ruin it. My sin would ruin it. My selfishness would ruin it. The bad things in my heart would make me do bad things, and I'd ruin God's perfect place. So isn't it great that God promises everyone who trusts in Jesus, they will be given good hearts. Hearts that have God's law written on them. Hearts that always want to do what's right. That won't sin. That will always keep God's law. See, God offers Christians heaven, or the new heaven and the new earth. But he also says, I'll make you fit for heaven. You'll be able to live in heaven and never mess it up, because you'll always do what's right and live forever.